Tony Delucci made a power move that should have worked. Kidnap Bumpy Johnson's pregnant wife. Force the king of Harlem to his knees. Take over his territory. On paper, it was brilliant. The Italian mob versus one black gangster. But Tony forgot something crucial. Some men don't negotiate. They annihilate. Harlem in the 1940s was a chessboard, and every player knew their square. On one side, Bumpy Johnson, numbers rackets, nightclub shakedowns, eye protection money. If cash moved through black hands in New York, Bumpy took his cut. He wasn't just muscle. He was strategy wrapped in street wisdom, a man who'd survived decades in a world built to bury him. On the other side, Tony Delucci, young Genovese capo with money, soldiers, and the kind of arrogance that comes from never being told no. He looked at Harlem and saw millions flowing through what he considered inferior hands. When Bumpy married Mayme Hatcher, Tony smirked. A gangster playing house. Then came the pregnancy. 7 months along, Mayme glowing with life, Bumpy protective in ways that made his own crew nervous, distracted, emotional, human. And Tony saw not a baby, but a weapon. His underboss warned him, "Bumpy's different. You take his woman, he'll burn everything down." Tony didn't listen. He should have. Every Sunday morning, the offering plates at Abyssinian Baptist Church collected more than prayer money. I folded between the dollar bills were slips of paper, 3-digit numbers, dreams translated into bets, the currency of hope in a neighborhood where hope was the only thing the city hadn't taxed yet. By Monday afternoon, every one of those numbers had passed through the hands of one man. Ellsworth, Bumpy Johnson, didn't look like a king. He dressed like one. Tailored suits, silk ties, shoes polished to a mirror shine. But kings usually sat on thrones, and Bumpy preferred the corner booth at Wells's Supper Club on 7th Avenue, where he could watch both doors and keep his back to the wall. He ate slowly. He listened more than he spoke. And every 15 minutes, someone would approach the booth. A nightclub owner needing a problem solved. A numbers runner reporting the day's take. A Harlem councilman who owed his seat to votes Bumpy had quietly organized. Each one got the same treatment. Eye contact, a full hearing, is a decision delivered so calmly it sounded like a suggestion. Nobody mistook it for one. One Tuesday evening in the spring of 1948, a dispute arrived at his booth in the form of 2 men who controlled rival numbers banks on the same block of 135th Street. Otis Redmond claimed Jasper Hooks was poaching his customers. Jasper claimed Otis was shorting payouts and driving bettors away on his own. Both men were armed. Both men were loud. So the restaurant had gone quiet enough to hear the ice settling in Bumpy's glass. He let them finish. Then he set down his fork, dabbed his mouth with a linen napkin, and spoke so softly both men had to lean in. "Otis, you're paying 60-1 on a hit. Jasper's paying 65. That's not poaching. That's math. Raise your payout or lose your customers honestly. Jasper, you're running your bank out of Otis's barbershop without cutting him rent. Why, that's disrespect wearing a business suit." He picked up his fork. Jasper pays Otis $30 a week for the space. Otis matches Jasper's payout ratio. You're both making money by Friday. If I hear about this again, neither of you will be making anything. Both men nodded. Both men left alive. The restaurant exhaled. That was Bumpy Johnson's Harlem. A country within a country. Self-governing. Self-policing. I built on numbers money and nightclub doors, and the unspoken understanding that what happened above 110th Street was handled above 110th Street. Policy banks funded the churches. Churches funded the schools. The nightclubs laundered the policy money and employed half the neighborhood. It was corrupt and functional, and it belonged to its people in a way that nothing else in 1948 America did. Bumpy hadn't built all of it, but he held it together the way a keystone holds an arch. Remove him, and the whole thing collapses into rubble. 14 miles south, in a social club on Mulberry Street that smelled like cigar smoke and espresso, a younger man was doing different math. Tony Delucci sat at a card table surrounded by men who called him boss, but meant it mostly out of habit. At 31, Montoni was the youngest capo in the Genovese family, a title he'd inherited when his uncle caught 3 bullets outside a bakery in Red Hook, rather than earned through the decades of loyalty the older generation expected. He had money. He had soldiers. He had a direct line to judges and police captains who picked up when he called. What he didn't have was patience, or the sense to recognize what patience was worth. He tossed a losing hand onto the felt and reached for his espresso. You know what I keep thinking about? Harlem. You know how much cash moves through those numbers banks every week? His underboss, Sal Moretti, didn't look up from his cards. Sal was 53, built like a fire hydrant, and wore a scar across his left cheek from a knife fight he'd won in 1929. He'd been in the life long enough to recognize ambition that outpaced intelligence. Harlem's not ours, Tony. Harlem's not anybody's. It's one guy. One. And he's getting comfortable. That one guy put Dutch Schultz in the ground. Tony waved the name away like cigarette smoke. That was 15 years ago. Bumpy's old now. Soft. You seen him lately? He's going to charity dinners. He's reading poetry books. The man's practically retired. Tony leaned forward, lowering his voice with the theatrical secrecy of a man who believed his own performance. The older families accept boundaries. I don't. Those boundaries were drawn by men who didn't have the guts to take what was available. Harlem is sitting there generating millions, and we're supposed to just… What? Respect the line? Sal said nothing. He played his hand, collected his modest pot, and kept his thoughts where they belonged, locked behind a face that had survived 30 years by revealing nothing. 3 weeks later, Tony got the news from one of his street captains. Bumpy Johnson's wife was pregnant, 6 months along. The kingpin of Harlem was decorating a nursery, picking out baby names, walking his woman to doctor's appointments with a smile on his face that his enemies had never seen before. Tony set down his espresso. The cup clinked against the saucer, the only sound in the room. Well, he said quietly, and something cold moved behind his eyes. That changes things. He wasn't looking at a family growing. He was looking at a lever, a pressure point, a weapon wrapped in a yellow maternity dress, and the gears of something terrible began to turn. Tony Delucci didn't rush. That was the dangerous part. A reckless man grabs what he can and hopes for the best. Tony studied, measured, documented, and then grabbed with surgical precision. He gave himself 3 weeks, and he used every hour of them. The first thing he did was put eyes on Mayme Hatcher Johnson. Not thugs loitering on street corners. That would draw attention in Bumpy's Harlem, but where strangers were noticed the way a body notices a splinter. Tony used professionals. A pair of men who looked like insurance adjusters drove a forgettable gray Plymouth and carried clipboards that gave them a reason to sit on any block in the city without raising suspicion. They followed Mayme for 21 days. They documented everything. She visited her hairdresser on Tuesdays, reading circle on Wednesdays, church on Sundays. But the golden pattern, the one Tony circled in red ink on the map above his desk, was Thursday. Every Thursday at 10 in the morning, Mayme drove to her sister Hilda's apartment in Brooklyn. The trip carried her south through Harlem, across the bridge, and into neighborhoods where Bumpy's protection thinned to nothing, where Italian eyes watched every corner. Her bodyguard was a former boxer named Raymond Atkins, loyal, fast with a pistol, predictable. He drove the black Cadillac, let the second guard rode passenger. They took the same route every Thursday, same traffic lights, same turns. Mayme liked routine, and Raymond gave his boss's pregnant wife whatever she wanted. Tony's men timed the signals along the route. They mapped every intersection where the car would slow, every stretch isolated from witnesses. They identified the kill zone, Atlantic Avenue and Flatbush, where the Cadillac would pass through a district busy enough to swallow gunfire, but exposed enough to box in a single vehicle from 4 directions. Tony compiled it all himself, spreading photographs across the card table after hours, tracing routes with his finger. Not a kidnapping, an invasion, disguised as one clean surgical act. While Tony mapped his war, 14 blocks north of Hell, Bumpy Johnson was painting a nursery. He'd chosen yellow. Mayme wanted the room to feel warm, regardless of whether the baby was a boy or girl. And Bumpy, the man who'd broken fingers, ordered beatings, and stared down killers without blinking, spent an entire Saturday afternoon with a roller brush, trying to get the second coat, even while Mayme directed him from a chair with her feet up and a glass of lemonade in her hand. "Higher on the left, Bumpy. You're leaving streaks." "Woman, I run Harlem. I can paint a wall." "You can run Harlem and leave streaks. Higher." He grinned. A private grin, the one his crew never saw. The one that belonged entirely to the life he'd built inside these walls, away from the numbers and the negotiations and the weight of being the man everyone depended on. They'd been discussing names. Mayme favored Margaret, after her mother. Bumpy liked Elise, though he couldn't say why. It just sounded like someone who'd grow up to be happy. They hadn't decided. Joanne the not deciding felt luxurious, like they had all the time in the world. His lieutenant Prophet stopped by that evening to deliver receipts from the week's numbers take. He found Bumpy on his knees, assembling a crib with an instruction sheet he clearly could not follow. Prophet watched for a moment, then said carefully, "Boss, you need help with that?" "I don't need help with a goddamn baby bed." Prophet waited. The left panel goes into the right bracket," Mayme called from the hallway. Bumpy stared at the pieces, then at Prophet, then at the instruction sheet. "Not a word," he said quietly. "To anyone. Ever." Prophet kept his face perfectly neutral. "Boss, I don't even know what a crib is." These were the moments Tony Delucci was counting on. The softness, the distraction, the human ordinary miracle of a man becoming a father and forgetting, even briefly, that he lived in a world where forgetting could be fatal. On the last night before Tony locked his plan into place, Sal Moretti tried one final time. They were alone in the social club, the other men gone home. Sal poured 2 glasses of anisette and set one in front of Tony. "Boss, I've been in this thing since I was 19. I've watched men plan smart and die anyway because they misread who they were dealing with." He turned the glass slowly. "Bumpy Johnson is not a man who folds. You take his pregnant woman. He won't come to the table. He'll come through the wall." Tony sipped his drink. "Sal, I love you like an uncle, but you're thinking like it's 1935. He's one man with a reputation. We're an institution. Institutions win." Sal held his gaze. Then he nodded, stood, and put on his hat. He walked to the door, paused with his hand on the knob, and said without turning around, "Just make sure your affairs are in order. Not because I think you're wrong. Because I was taught to prepare for everything." The door closed behind him. Tony sat alone, maps and photographs spread before him. He reviewed the plan one final time. 4 cars, 12 men, the intersection, the Bronx safehouse with barred windows and rotating guards. Everything accounted for. He folded the map, clicked off the lamp, and walked into the October night feeling something he mistook for certainty. In 3 days, he would sign his own death warrant. He just didn't know he was holding the pen. Thursday, October 14th, 1948. The sky over Harlem was the color of dirty dishwater, low clouds pressing down on the rooftops, the air heavy with the smell of rain that hadn't decided whether to fall. It was the kind of morning that made people walk faster, collars turned up, eyes on the sidewalk. The kind of morning that made you forget to look behind you. Mayme Johnson stood in front of the hallway mirror at 10 minutes to 10. They're turning sideways to examine the way her yellow dress fell over the curve of her belly. 7 months. The fabric was new. She'd had it taken out twice already, and the seamstress on Lenox Avenue had laughed gently and told her to stop buying dresses until after the baby came. But Mayme liked yellow. It reminded her of the nursery walls, still smelling faintly of fresh paint, and of Bumpy on his knees with a roller brush, pretending he knew what he was doing. She rested her hand on the bump the way she always did now, not thinking about it, just checking. Still there, still moving. A tiny heel pressing against her palm like a secret handshake between 2 people who hadn't met yet. "Mrs. Johnson, car's ready." Raymond Atkins stood at the bottom of the stairs, hat in hand, shoulders filling the doorframe the way they'd once filled a boxing ring. He'd been Bumpy's driver for 3 years, her personal bodyguard for 6 months, and in all that time, she'd never seen him smile at anyone except her. He opened the rear door of the black Cadillac and waited while she lowered herself carefully onto the leather seat, one hand on the doorframe, the other on her belly. A second guard, a quiet, serious man everyone called D, sat in the passenger seat with a .38 under his jacket and a newspaper folded on his lap. He nodded to Mayme in the rearview mirror. She nodded back. This was routine. Every Thursday, were Hilda's apartment in Brooklyn, lunch, gossip about cousins and church, then home by 2. Raymond pulled away from the brownstone at 10:04 a.m. Mayme watched Harlem slide past the window, the fruit vendors setting up on the corner, the schoolchildren in their pressed uniforms, a woman hanging laundry from a 4th-floor fire escape. She was thinking about names. Margaret, Elise, maybe Ruth, after Bumpy's grandmother. She was thinking about the white bassinet she'd seen in a shop window on 125th Street, the one with the lace trim that cost too much, but that Bumpy would buy anyway the moment she mentioned it. She was thinking about all of this when the Cadillac crossed the bridge into Brooklyn and turned south onto Flatbush Avenue. She never saw the gray sedan pull out from a side street 3 blocks behind them. She didn't notice the black Ford that had been parked on Atlantic Avenue since 8 that morning, engine off, 4 men inside, watching the intersection with the patience of hunters who already knew where their prey would cross. She didn't see the 2 cars idling in the lot of a closed filling station on the opposite corner, waiting for a signal that would come in the form of headlights flashed twice. The Cadillac reached the intersection of Atlantic and Flatbush at 10:31 a.m. The light was red. Raymond stopped. D turned a page of his newspaper. The 4 cars moved at once. They came from 3 directions, front, rear, and the driver's side, boxing the Cadillac so tightly that Raymond couldn't have opened his door if he'd tried. 12 men emerged in the time it takes to exhale. Dark coats, dark hats, moving with the coordinated silence of men who had rehearsed this moment until it felt like breathing. Raymond's hand went for the gun under his seat. Vesey was fast. Years of ring training had given him reflexes that most men couldn't match. His fingers touched the grip. He was pulling it free when the first bullet came through his window and caught him in the shoulder. The second hit his chest. The third went through his throat. His hand opened. The gun clattered to the floorboard. He slumped sideways against the steering wheel, and the horn let out a single, short bleat that nobody on the street would remember hearing. Dadi dropped the newspaper and reached across his body for the .38. 2 rounds punched through the windshield before he cleared the holster. He fell back against the seat with his eyes open and his hand still inside his jacket. 4 seconds. 2 men dead. The intersection frozen. A woman with a grocery bag standing on the corner with her mouth open. A taxi driver gripping his steering wheel. A boy on a bicycle stopped mid-pedal. Is all of them witnessing something their minds would spend years trying to reclassify as anything other than what it was. Mayme's door was ripped open. Hands reached in. 3 sets, firm but controlled, gripping her arms and shoulders with a precision that communicated a specific instruction. Don't damage the merchandise. She screamed. She kicked. She tried to twist away, her arms wrapping instinctively around her belly, every cell in her body collapsing into a single priority. Protect the baby, protect the baby, protect the baby. A cloth bag went over her head. The world went dark and muffled, and she was being lifted, carried, placed into a back seat that smelled like cigarettes and leather polish. Doors slammed. Engines roared. Tires bit asphalt. 90 seconds, start to finish. By the time the woman with the grocery bag remembered how to breathe, the intersection was empty except for a black Cadillac with 2 dead men inside and a yellow dress pattern pressed into the leather of the back seat where Mayme had been sitting 30 seconds earlier. The Bronx safehouse was a house that nobody would look at twice. Beige siding, chain-link fence, a lawn that needed mowing. The kind of place where a family might live quietly and never bother the neighbors. Inside, it was a cage. Barred windows, reinforced doors, to 6 men rotating 8-hour shifts, armed with shotguns and the cold professionalism of soldiers who'd made people disappear before and would do it again without losing sleep. They brought Mayme upstairs to a bedroom with a single window that had been boarded shut from the outside. A bed, a chair, a lamp, a bathroom she could use under supervision. They brought her water and a sandwich she didn't touch. Nobody spoke to her except to give instructions. She sat on the edge of the bed with her hands on her belly and her back straight, and she did not cry. Not where they could see. She pressed her lips together until they went white, and she breathed slowly through her nose, and she waited, because she knew something that every man in that house had failed to calculate. She knew her husband. At 11:47 a.m., Bumpy Johnson was sitting at the head of a table in his Lenox Avenue office, reviewing numbers receipts with 3 of his lieutenants, when the telephone rang. His secretary's voice came through the receiver, cracked and shaking. She said 4 words, and the room changed temperature. Bumpy listened for 30 seconds without speaking. He placed the receiver down with the care of a man handling something that might explode. He stood. He buttoned his jacket. The men at the table watched him the way animals watch a change in weather, not understanding exactly what was happening, but knowing in their bones that something had shifted. He walked to the door. He stopped. He turned back, and his face was the blankest, emptiest thing any of them had ever seen. Not angry, not afraid, not anything at all. a mask with nothing behind it except a decision that had already been made. Mayme's been taken. The room stopped breathing. Find out who. Find out where. I want names in 6 hours. He held the silence for one more beat, then added, I very quietly, or I start burying my own people for incompetence. The door closed behind him. The room erupted. The study was the only room in the brownstone where Bumpy allowed himself to be alone. Bookshelves lined 3 walls. Langston Hughes, W.E.B. Du Bois, a worn Machiavelli with notes in the margins. A window facing 147th Street, where the street lamp threw a yellow circle onto the sidewalk that reminded him, tonight, of a dress. At 7 o'clock on October 14th, Bumpy sat behind his desk with a cigarette burning untouched and a framed photograph in his hands. Their wedding. Mayme in white, laughing at something he'd whispered, her head tilted back so the light caught the line of her throat. He couldn't remember what he'd said. He could remember exactly how she smelled. He'd been sitting like that for almost 2 hours. His lieutenants were tearing Harlem apart for information. Prophet had put the word out to every informant and debtor in the city. The machinery was moving. There was nothing for Bumpy to do except wait, and waiting required a quiet mind. And his mind was running calculations, angles of approach, lists of enemies. The sound Mayme made when she was frightened, the small intake of breath she tried to hide because she never wanted him to worry. The telephone rang. He picked it up on the first ring. He said nothing. Bumpy Johnson. The voice on the other end was warm, almost friendly, and the way a man sounds when he's holding a winning hand and wants you to know it. I've been looking forward to this conversation. Bumpy recognized the voice. Tony Delucci, a younger man he'd seen once at a sit-down 2 years ago, the one who talked too much and listened too little. Where is she? It wasn't a question. It was a statement shaped like a demand. Safe and sound, for now. Tony paused. Let's talk business, man to man. Your woman and that baby. They're my guests. They stay guests as long as you're reasonable. Bumpy said nothing. Sign over your Harlem operations, all of it. Numbers, protection, nightclubs. You walk away breathing. She comes home safe. 48 hours. How many men are guarding her? The interruption caught Tony off rhythm. He recovered quickly, but the half-second pause told Bumpy everything. Tony was performing confidence, not living in it. Enough, men, Tony said. Don't waste your time thinking about rescue missions. Oh, this isn't the movies. How many? 6. Professional. Ex-military. Each one worth 3 of your... Tony stopped himself, but the number was already out. 6. Bumpy filed it alongside every other detail his mind was quietly cataloging. The echo on the line suggesting tile floors, the muffled voices in the background, the particular arrogance of a man who has never had a plan go wrong. The silence stretched. 10 seconds. 20. Long enough that Tony checked the connection. Bumpy? You still there? Tony? The voice that came through the line was so quiet that Tony had to press the receiver hard against his ear. You just killed yourself, and everyone who helped you. Tony's smile didn't waver. Not yet. I'm not bringing money. I'm not bringing papers. I'm bringing coffins. A pause so deliberate it had weight. 6 for your soldiers. Something special for you. Tell them to make their peace. Tony laughed. Genuine. Delighted. Bumpy, you're a smart man. I don't do this. You can't win. We've got your whole world locked in a room. Play tough and she dies. Be smart. Sign the papers. The line went dead. Bumpy had hung up. Tony set the phone down and turned to his crew. 5 men arranged around the social club like an audience. He spread his hands and grinned. He's bluffing. Give him 24 hours to sit with it. He'll break. They always break. The room laughed. Drinks were poured. Cards were dealt. In the corner, Sal Moretti did not laugh. He stood with his back against the wall and replayed the phone call in his mind. Not Tony's side, which had been theater, but the silence on the other end. The long silence of a man who hadn't been thinking about what to say. He'd been thinking about what to do. And when he finally spoke, there was no anger, no desperation, just certainty. The kind that comes from a man who has already decided you're dead and is simply working out the order of operations. Sal uncrossed his arms. He put on his coat, told the room he was going home early, stomach trouble, and stepped out onto Mulberry Street. 3 blocks to his apartment, kitchen table, the drawer with important documents. He pulled out his will, read it carefully, crossed out 2 names and added one, his sister's youngest daughter, the one studying to be a nurse, signed it, dated it, put it back. Then he poured himself a glass of anisette, sat in the dark, and waited. Because Sal Moretti had been in the life for 34 years, and he knew, the way old sailors know weather, that the sound of Bumpy Johnson's voice on that telephone was not a storm warning. It was the storm itself, already overhead. The rain just hadn't started yet. Back on Mulberry Street, Tony won 3 hands in a row and took it as an omen. 24 hours, he said, stacking his chips. Then we own Harlem. Nobody in that room would own anything in 48 hours. But the chips clicked pleasantly, and the espresso was hot, and the future felt like something Tony Delucci could hold in his hands. He was wrong about that too. The basement of 409 Lenox Avenue had been a laundry before Bumpy converted it. Concrete walls still held the ghost of industrial soap. At midnight on October 15th, the room was cold and thick with the breathing of 15 men summoned without explanation. Come armed and come quiet. They sat around a long table built for sorting linens. Enforcers, numbers men, intelligence runners, a former professor, the architects who made Bumpy's Harlem function. They'd never all been in the same room. That alone told them something had gone catastrophically wrong. Bumpy came down at 12:04 a.m. wearing the same suit from 14 hours ago. He hadn't changed because changing meant opening the closet where Mayme's dresses hung. He walked to the head of the table, lit a cigarette, and set it in an ashtray where it burned untouched for the rest of the meeting, and said nothing. 5 seconds. 10. 15. The silence became a living thing. He let it grow until every man was desperate for someone to speak. Tony Delucci has my wife. The room didn't react, not because they already knew, but because the way Bumpy said it left no space for reaction. He thinks this is business. Bumpy's eyes moved across each face. It's not business. It's extinction. His. As everyone who helped him. Everyone who knew and didn't stop it. He began assigning pieces. Early. A quiet man in the third chair lifted his head. Early ran the informant network. Maids, janitors, delivery boys, anyone who moved through the city's private spaces with invisible hands. I need the location. Guards, shift rotations, exits. 12 hours. Already working, boss. Got a girl who cleans for Sal Moretti's household. Bronx address. A confirmation by morning. Profit? The big man at the far end straightened. His left hand was missing 2 fingers from a knife fight in '36, and he carried a Tommy gun the way other men carry briefcases. Assault coordination. Routes in, routes out, every escape sealed before the first shot. Prophet nodded. How many men am I taking in? You're taking your team through the back. I'm going through the front. The room shifted. Prophet's expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened. I alone? Solomon spoke from the middle of the table, former mathematics professor at Howard, gambling debt turned strategist, round spectacles, careful diction. That's not strategy, that's suicide dressed in a good suit. It's optics. If I take a crew, it's an invasion. The Italians frame it as territorial aggression. If I go alone, it's a man getting his wife back. The kind of thing even their own people understand. Their own people, Solomon said slowly. Oh, the idea landed behind his eyes. You're not going to fight the Italians. You're going to make them fight each other. Tony's ambitious enough to scare the people above him. Carlo Gambino's been watching Tony expand for 2 years. I'm going to offer Carlo everything Tony built. Drugs, unions, political contacts. Hand it over clean. All Carlo has to do is look the other way for 6 hours. Prophet leaned forward. Mark Gambino's not going to help a black man kill an Italian. He's going to help a businessman remove a competitor. My skin color is irrelevant when I'm handing him a fortune. At 9 the next morning, Bumpy sat across from Carlo Gambino in a back room at Rio's on Mulberry Street. Carlo was 60, silver-haired, with eyes that calculated value the way jewelers calculate carats, 2 espressos between them. Neither man touched his cup. Bumpy laid it out in under 3 minutes. Not Tony's kidnapping, Tony's ambition, Tony's inevitable expansion into Gambino territory. Then the offer. Phone lines cut, escape routes blocked, your people looking the other way for 6 hours. And Tony's entire infrastructure is yours. Carlo listened without interrupting. You're asking me to betray a fellow Italian over a personal matter. I'm asking you to invest in the removal of a man who'll be stealing from you within the year. Carlo's mouth twitched. You've got nerve. Johnson. He sipped his espresso. What guarantee this stays clean? My word, and the fact that if it gets messy, I'm the one who dies, not you. Carlo extended his hand. Deal. Phone lines, routes, 6 hours. But this never happened. We never met. And you owe me a favor. Unspecified, unrestricted, whenever I call. Understood. By 11, he was back on Lenox Avenue. Early's intelligence confirmed 1847 Crotona Avenue. 2-story, 6 guards, 8-hour rotations. Prophet's team through the rear, Bumpy through the front. Gambino's men sealing the perimeter. Then Prophet asked the question nobody else would. And Tony? The table went quiet. Tony gets something special. Bumpy turned to Solomon. Tomorrow, 4 p.m., and Solomon. Have 6 coffins ready. Good ones. Mahogany. Brass handles. We're not sending a threat. We're sending a message. Solomon cleaned his spectacles. I'll have them by noon. The meeting broke at 3 a.m. Men filed into the Harlem night, each carrying a piece of the plan, each understanding that by this time, tomorrow, the world would look different. Bumpy stayed behind. Alone at the table, overhead, pipes dripping, he pulled the wedding photograph from his breast pocket. Mayme laughing, the light on her throat. He put it back, buttoned his jacket, and climbed the stairs. 22 hours until 4 p.m. Somewhere in the Bronx, behind barred windows, his wife was waiting. And Bumpy Johnson, who had spent his entire life making other men afraid, was the most frightened he had ever been. He just couldn't afford to show it. Not until she was safe. At 3:47 p.m. on Saturday, October 16th, a boy named Gerald hit a rubber ball with a broomstick on Crotona Avenue and sent it sailing into Mrs. Petrosino's yard. But today, the yard was empty. Mrs. Petrosino had gone to visit her sister, a trip she hadn't planned until yesterday, when a polite man offered $500 cash for an afternoon's absence. She didn't ask why. In that neighborhood, you didn't. At both ends of the block, sedans had been parked since noon. Gambino's people, making sure nobody drove on or off this street. The phone lines to 1847 Crotona had been cut at 2 o'clock by a man in a telephone company uniform who clipped 2 wires and vanished. Inside the safe house, 6 men did what men do when they're bored and armed. They waited, on Dominic at the front door, watching through a peephole, Angelo covering the back with a shotgun and a racing form, Marco guarding the upstairs hallway outside the room where Mayme sat on a bed with her hands on her belly, Leo and Polly in the kitchen, Vincenzo making coffee. They expected trouble at night. Nobody hit a safe house at 4 in the afternoon with children playing stickball outside. That was insane. That was exactly what Bumpy was counting on. At 3:59 p.m., where Prophet positioned his team at the rear, Tommy gun in his right hand, a small explosive charge in his left, enough to blow a reinforced lock, not enough to shatter windows across the street. He set it, stepped back, nodded. At 4 o'clock exactly, Bumpy Johnson turned the corner onto Crotona Avenue. He walked up the sidewalk alone. Dark suit, white shirt, polished shoes, a man arriving for dinner. He climbed the front steps and stood there, adjusting his cuffs, as though he had all the time in the world. Dominic saw him through the peephole. One man, black, well-dressed. His training screamed trap. His hand went to his holster. He was pulling the pistol free when the world split in half. 2 things happened simultaneously. The back door blew inward, a sharp crack, like a car backfiring. Angelo spun toward the sound, reaching for the shotgun. 2 silenced rounds caught him before the barrel cleared the table. He fell sideways and didn't move. At the front, Bumpy kicked the door with a force that shouldn't have come from a man his size. The deadbolt ripped from the frame. Dominic stumbled backward, half blinded by daylight. His hand came up with the pistol. Bumpy was faster. A knife, short-bladed military, appeared from his jacket. One motion. The blade found Dominic's throat. He went down, making a sound like water leaving a drain, and Bumpy stepped over him without breaking stride. Upstairs, Marco took position at the top of the stairs, automatic rifle leveled at the stairwell. Narrow hallway. Kill funnel. He was good. Prophet came up anyway. Marco fired first. 3 rounds. The first missed. The second grazed Prophet's arm. The third punched through his shoulder. Prophet didn't stop. He walked forward into the gunfire the way a man walks into heavy rain, aware of it, refusing to let it change his direction. The Tommy gun barked twice. Marco dropped. Prophet stood over him, breathing hard, blood running down his arm and dripping off his fingertips. He pressed his hand against the wound, felt the exit hole, and decided it could wait. In the kitchen, Leo and Polly flipped the table and aimed at the back entrance. Early's crew came through like smoke. Tear gas first, bouncing off tile, hissing white vapor. Then 2 flashbangs. The kitchen became a box of noise and light and blindness. Polly broke, ran for the side door. The bullets from 2 directions found him before his hand touched the knob. Leo stayed behind the table, firing blind, screaming through lungs full of gas until the magazine was empty. Then the kitchen went quiet, and the quiet was ended by a single shot that wasn't his. 5 men down. The house fell silent. Upstairs, Mayme had heard all of it. The explosion, the gunfire, the screaming, the silence. She didn't know who was winning. Then the bedroom door crashed open. Vincenzo. Oh, instead of fighting, he'd done the only smart thing left. He grabbed Mayme, pressed his pistol to her temple, and backed into the corner, her body between him and the doorway, his hand shaking, his breathing ragged, but his finger inside the trigger guard and the barrel pressed hard enough to leave a bruise that would last weeks. "Back off!" he screamed into the hallway. His voice cracked on the second word. "I've got the woman! I'll kill her and the kid! Back the hell off!" The house went silent. Bumpy's men held positions in the hallway, weapons trained on the doorway. The geometry was impossible. Any bullet that reached Vincenzo would travel through Mayme first. Seconds passed. 5, 10, 15. Each one lasted a year. Then footsteps on the stairs. Slow, deliberate. So one man climbing toward the sound of Vincenzo's voice with the unhurried patience of someone who has already accepted every possible outcome and chosen the one he intends to make real. Bumpy appeared in the doorway, and Vincenzo almost lost control of his bladder. This was not the man from the newspaper photographs. This was something that had walked through 5 armed men and come out wearing their blood. His suit was destroyed, torn, soaked dark, smeared with things Vincenzo didn't want to identify. His hands were red to the wrists, and his eyes held nothing. No anger, no mercy, just purpose. Vincenzo pressed the gun harder against Mayme's temple. She winced but didn't cry out. She'd stopped crying the moment she heard those footsteps on the stairs. Unhurried, deliberate. She knew that walk. She'd heard it come through their front door 1,000 evenings. Let her go. 2 words. Quiet enough that Vincenzo strained to hear them over his own heartbeat. "You're a professional, Vincenzo. I know your name. I know you've got a mother on Arthur Avenue who thinks you work in construction." Vincenzo flinched. "Killing her means you die in a way she'll hear about. Letting her go means you walk out. 5-minute head start. My word." "Your word don't mean shit," Vincenzo said, but his voice cracked and they both heard it. "My word is the only thing keeping you breathing. Decide fast. My patience ended in the kitchen." Vincenzo ran the math. He was dead. He knew that. Tony was gone. The 5 men downstairs were silent, which meant they were finished. Gambino's people were outside. He had a pistol, a hostage, and roughly 90 seconds. 5 minutes of life versus 0. Not much, but more than nothing. His grip loosened. A fraction of pressure, a slight shift of the barrel away from bone. And Mayme felt it. She'd been tracking every micro-change in the body pressed against hers with the hyper-awareness of a woman whose child's life depended on it. She felt the hesitation, and she made her choice. She drove her elbow backward into Vincenzo's ribs. Not hard. 7 months pregnant. She didn't have hard to give. She didn't need it. She needed one thing, a fraction of a second where the barrel wasn't touching her skull. She got it. Bumpy covered the distance in a motion Vincenzo's brain couldn't process. Left hand forced the pistol upward. It fired, plaster raining from the ceiling. Right hand found Vincenzo's throat, a grip like a vice. Vincenzo's eyes went wide. No sound came out. The pistol clattered. He went down, and the last thing he saw was Bumpy's face, already looking past him toward the woman. Then the killer vanished, like a mask removed. Prophet, standing in the hallway bleeding, I had to look away from what replaced it. Bumpy crossed the room to Mayme, not the predatory stride, but something careful, tentative, as though he was afraid she'd flinch at what he'd become. She didn't flinch. She grabbed his ruined lapels and pulled him to her. He wrapped his arms around her with impossible gentleness, face in her hair, voice breaking. "I've got you, baby. I've got you. The baby's fine." She cried, 3 days of stored terror releasing in deep, shaking sobs. He held her for 5 seconds, all they could afford. He cupped her face, red hands against tear-streaked cheeks. "Prophet's going to take you out the back. Car waiting. Doctor in Harlem. Don't look down in the house. Don't listen. Just go." "Bumpy, what are you? Go, baby. Please." Prophet appeared, shoulder bleeding through a bandage. He took Mayme's arm gently and guided her toward the stairs. She didn't look down, just as Bumpy asked. But she heard his footsteps moving the opposite direction, toward the kitchen, toward whatever came next. Within 3 minutes, she was in a car headed north, hands on her belly, feeling the baby kick. Strong. Alive. She didn't look back. Bumpy checked his watch. 5:03 p.m. He had his crew arrange the 5 bodies, not piled, but laid out with ceremony. Hands folded, eyes closed. The way you treat the dead sends a message to the living. Then he sat in the kitchen and waited. At 5:28 p.m., then Tony Delucci stepped out of a black sedan, 2 bodyguards flanking him, whistling, a man arriving to collect his winnings. He climbed the steps and pushed the front door. Unlocked. First, wrong thing. Silent. Second. Tony drew his pistol. They moved through the rooms. Empty. Empty. Into the kitchen. 5 men laid out in rows. Hands folded. Cooling. Tony's blood turned to ice. Behind him, a door closed. He spun. Bumpy stood in the doorway. Behind him, Prophet and a dozen men materialized from every shadow, weapons drawn. "Bumpy?" Tony's voice came thin. "Let's talk. Business is business. I've got money. You made it personal when you touched her, so now it's permanent. Wait. Take them." The bodyguards never fired. Disarmed, restrained, dragged toward the basement. Tony screamed, offered everything. Money, territory, his own men. Bumpy followed him down the stairs without speaking. Prophet stood guard at the top. He was a man who'd done terrible things, but the sounds that came through that door over the next 17 minutes made him close his eyes and breathe through his mouth. Screams first, then pleading, then wet sounds without names, then silence. The silence was worse. The door opened. Bumpy emerged alone, wiping his hands on a rag with the slow care of a man cleaning tools after work. His face was blank, not satisfied, not disturbed. It was as though he'd completed a task that needed completing and nothing more. Basement needs extensive cleaning. Use lye. Lots of it. Nothing identifiable. Prophet looked at the door. And the body? Bumpy's smile was the most terrifying thing Prophet had ever seen. Not because it was cruel, but because it was empty. A smile with nothing behind it. What body? A black hearse pulled up to the Genovese Social Club on Mulberry Street at 7:14 on Sunday morning. 2 men in dark suits unloaded a coffin onto the sidewalk, set it on wooden sawhorses in front of the entrance, and drove away without speaking. The coffin was beautiful. Mahogany, brass handles, the kind of box that cost more than most men on Mulberry Street earned in a month. By 7:30, capos and soldiers had gathered, men summoned by whispers, pulling on coats over undershirts, arriving with the grim urgency of people who know a coffin on their doorstep means the rules have shifted. Someone opened the lid. Dominic Russo. Dressed in a suit nicer than anything he'd worn in life. Charcoal wool, white shirt, dark tie. Hands folded, eyes closed, face cleaned, hair combed. On his chest, centered with deliberate care, a single black rose. Attached to the stem, a card in elegant cursive. This man worked for Tony Delucci. No threat, no demand, just a name, a fact, and a flower. The men understood what unsettled them. Bumpy had killed their soldier, but honored the body, paid for a coffin that cost real money, dressed the man properly, observed the code. This wasn't savagery. This was ceremony. And ceremony meant the sender was in complete control. Monday. Angelo Martino arrived at a Bronx funeral home. Same mahogany, same rose, same card. The funeral director, a man who'd processed mob casualties for 20 years, called it the most unsettling delivery he'd ever received. Not the body, the presentation. Yeah, whoever did this wasn't angry. They were making a point. Tuesday. 3 coffins delivered to family homes, Marco, Leo, Paulie, within an hour of each other. Each family opened their door to find their son in a box that cost more than their furniture, wearing clothes they didn't recognize, with a rose and a card. Marco's mother collapsed. Leo's wife screamed, then went silent for 3 days. Paulie's father, a retired dock worker, stood over the coffin, removed the rose. I pressed it into his family Bible and carried his son inside. They wept, but they understood. Their boys had died in the life, and the man who killed them gave their families something the life almost never provides: closure, a body to bury, a face to see one last time. Bumpy could have dissolved those bodies in lie. Instead, he sent them home. It was the closest thing to mercy that murder allowed. Wednesday. The final coffin arrived at Sal Moretti's restaurant, I Vincenzo Calabrese, the one who'd pressed a gun to a pregnant woman's temple. Same rose, same card. Sal stood over the coffin while waiters froze. He'd warned Tony, begged him. Now 6 soldiers were in boxes, and the man who gave them orders had vanished so completely the pavement forgot he'd walked on it. That evening, after the restaurant had emptied and the coffin had been collected by Vincenzo's brother, the front door opened and Prophet walked in. Shoulder bandaged, arm in a sling, face neutral as a closed book. He stopped 3 paces from Sal's table. "Mr. Moretti, message from Bumpy Johnson." Sal set down his wine glass. Every man in the room, busboys, cooks, the 2 soldiers standing by the kitchen door, went still. The war's over. No more coffins coming. Mr. Gambino's taking over Tony's operations as agreed. Bumpy goes back to Harlem. You go back to business. Clean slate. Sal studied Prophet the way a man studies a document he needs to sign. Vo and Tony? Prophet's expression didn't change by a single degree. What Tony? I ain't heard of nobody named Tony lately. Have you? The silence lasted long enough to become its own kind of conversation. Then Sal nodded, slowly, the way a man nods when he's agreeing not just to a statement, but to a version of reality. No, can't say I have. Good, then we're done here. Prophet paused. Bumpy also wants you to know, the 6 men died professional. Quick and clean as it could be. Like he respects soldiers doing their job, just not the man who gave them their orders. Sal appreciated the distinction. In their world, it mattered. Tell Bumpy the Genovese family has no quarrel with Harlem. Prophet nodded and left. The restaurant exhaled. Within a week, Carlo Gambino had absorbed Tony's drug pipeline, union contacts, and political connections. Everything transferred like a deed through means the paperwork would never reflect. The Genovese family accepted Sal's promotion without objection. Nobody said Tony's name out loud. The NYPD opened an investigation. Detectives interviewed associates who couldn't recall Tony's face. Witnesses developed the kind of amnesia only money or fear can produce. The case file migrated to a shelf in a Bronx precinct. Tony's car was found near the Hudson docks. His body was never recovered. Somewhere beneath a foundation poured during a construction project nobody remembered, but whatever remained of Tony Delucci became part of the city's geology. Permanent, anonymous, erased. But the underworld remembered, not Tony, who was already becoming a cautionary whisper. They remembered the coffins. 6 mahogany boxes with black roses and handwritten cards, each a masterpiece of controlled communication. The message wasn't in the words. It was in the wood, the brass, the pressed suits, the folded hands. It said, "I killed your men and honored your dead, and ended this on terms that respect the rules we all live by. Cross the line I've drawn, and the next coffins won't come with roses." Nobody crossed the line. On a cold morning in January 1949, in a delivery room at Harlem Hospital that smelled of antiseptic and prayer, Mayme Johnson brought a girl into the world. The delivery was uncomplicated. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, dark hair, lungs that announced her arrival to every nurse on the floor. When in the hallway, 12 of Bumpy's men stood guard. 3 months since the kidnapping, and he was not a man who believed in the kindness of passing time. He was allowed in 20 minutes after. He'd been pacing in a suit that cost more than the hospital's electric bill, the nervous energy of a man who could plan assaults with ice in his veins, but came undone at the thought of his wife behind a closed door. The nurse nodded. He entered, scanning for threats, then saw Mayme, and the scanning stopped. She was propped up on pillows, exhausted and luminous, holding a bundle of white blankets that contained, as far as Bumpy was concerned, the entire reason the world existed. "Come hold your daughter." He crossed the room. Mayme placed the baby in his arms. The baby was impossibly small. Her face was scrunched and ancient and brand new all at once. Were her fingers, each one no bigger than a matchstick, curled and uncurled with the purposeless rhythm of someone who didn't yet know what hands were for. Bumpy held her with the same hands that had ended 7 lives to bring her mother home. He looked at his daughter's fingers, and something behind his sternum cracked open like ice breaking on a river. Not dramatically, just a shift, deep and permanent, in a heart reinforced against this kind of vulnerability for 43 years. Her fingers found his thumb and wrapped around it. The grip was weaker than a whisper and stronger than anything he'd ever felt. They named her Margaret, after Mayme's mother. The christening at Abyssinian Baptist Church was the kind of event Harlem would gossip about for years. Black gangsters in front pews, Italian mobsters in back. Carlo Gambino came carrying a silver rattle. Afterward, in the vestibule, "Beautiful daughter, Bumpy. May she never know the life we live. That's the plan. You've earned respect that crosses color lines. Don't waste it." Handshake. 2 kings. Then Carlo left in a black car, and Bumpy returned to Mayme and Margaret and the church full of people who loved him or feared him or both. But the kidnapping had changed him. Their brownstone became a fortress. Reinforced doors, bulletproof glass, armed guards around the clock, a panic room adjoining the nursery. So Mayme couldn't walk to the grocery without 3 men following. Bumpy checked every lock 3 times a night, woke from nightmares reaching across the bed for her shoulder, holding it until his breathing steadied. Stood over Margaret's crib for hours, counting the rise and fall of the blanket. One night, Mayme found him at the window for the 3rd time. "Bumpy, we can't live like this forever." He didn't turn around. "Yes, not we can. The 3 days she'd been gone had aged him in ways no mirror could show. He'd saved her. He'd saved their daughter. And some part of him had stayed in that safe house, locked in a room with the fear he'd never fully leave behind. The legend needed no help. In Harlem barbershops, that's what you do for family. In Italian social clubs, power ain't about what you control, it's about what you're willing to lose. The black roses became iconic, mobsters using them as warnings, florists in Little Italy reporting a surge in orders. The Delucci warning, some called it. In rooms where civil rights was discussed in whispers, Bumpy's name surfaced in ways he never sought. In an era when black men were lynched with impunity, a black gangster had challenged the most powerful criminal institution in America and won. Margaret grew up, became a teacher, married a good man. Bumpy walked her down the aisle with a smile the guests remembered as the most unguarded expression they'd ever seen on his face. He died on July 7th, 1968, collapsing outside Wells's Supper Club, the same restaurant where he'd settled the dispute between Otis and Jasper 20 years earlier. Thousands attended his funeral. Carlo Gambino sent a massive arrangement. At the center, among white lilies, a single black rose. Mayme saw it from across the room and understood. She pressed it into a leather Bible and kept it until her own death. And every year, on Margaret's birthday, an anonymous black rose appeared on their doorstep. Nobody claimed responsibility. Mayme suspected Carlo. Bumpy had suspected one of his crew, a quiet reminder of the price paid and the love that justified it. Either way, the rose meant the same thing. It meant the story wasn't over. It meant some debts outlive the men who owe them. Some debts are paid in blood, and some lessons are written in coffins, and some love is worth going to war over. Bumpy Johnson proved all three. The 6 coffins delivered with roses and respect became the permanent reminder that the most dangerous man is not the one fighting for power. He's the one fighting for love. And love, when properly motivated, will send you home in a box with a flower on top and a note that simply reads, "This man made a mistake. I'll see you in the next one."